Why, hello there, friends. It's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. The light is quickly fading from this December day, as is the year. We're almost at the conclusion of 2022, and that means that it's time for me to share my 22 favorite books that I read this past year. I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas and you have a Happy New Year coming up ahead of you. This is the 8th consecutive year that I have shared a favorite books of the year video. They're always so much fun to film, so fun to make my list, go through everything that I read, what were my favorites. This is not in any particular order. I don't think I could rank order it. That would be too difficult, but these were the 22 that stood out the most. So I'm just gonna go ahead and jump into it. I had to include All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. This is the classic tale of a Yorkshire vet. I put off reading it for quite a long time. I love British literature from this time period, kind of around World War II. The reason I didn't get around to it is because I'm not the biggest animal person, and especially getting into the stalls with the cows and the sheep, it didn't really appeal to me. It must be confessed that you do get into the stalls with the cows and the sheep. However, in spite of that, there was so much to delight in this book. Just the way he gets to know all of the Yorkshire farmers and their down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth good qualities. The way he's able to laugh at himself, the way he's always committed to the truth, even in like small little situations where it would be easy to lie and get away with it. I love how he really sticks to his guns and doesn't let power manipulate or intimidate him. I'm very much looking forward to diving into even more of his tales. Luckily, there are quite a few books. This is the beautiful Pan Macmillan. Tom Cole is the illustrator of this cover, and there's a whole series of them, some of which might be on my Christmas list. I am cheating a little bit with this list because I have a couple items that are series of books instead of just one book, because I couldn't pick one favorite. This is from a series by Lorna Hill. Dancing Peel is the first one in the series. You can tell what it's about just from the delightful cover. It's about Annette Dancy, who is an aspiring dancer growing up in the borderlands between Scotland and England. She lives in a beautiful old tumbling down castle called the Dancing Peel. She practices her pirouettes in the horse stables. She likes to imagine that it's the Grand Opera. And we get to follow her story through several books. Dancer's Luck takes us to the Isle of Skye in the Highlands, and it's just so, so beautiful. And then you also have Dancer in the Wings and The Little Dancer. I think the first two might be my favorite, Dancing Peel and Dancing Luck, but they're all just charming. I had not reread these in the longest time. I had misplaced my copies, and I finally found them, so it was so wonderful to reread them and just come back to the wonderful story of Annette. The other series on my list is quite different. It is C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, science fiction, Out of the Silent Planet, Perelandra, and That Hideous Strength. I read all three of these this year. Shout out to my brother Porthos. Thank you for loaning me your copies. I will give them back to you now. And if you finished Inferno, because he has my copy of, no, not Inferno, he has my copy of Dante's Purgatorio, you can give that back to me. It'll be a nice little swap. I went into this series with pretty low expectations. I'd heard they were a little bit out there, and I think that's fair. You shouldn't expect perfection. You shouldn't expect like Lord of the Rings world building from this. But if you enjoy C.S. Lewis's nonfiction and like just the depth of thought and theology and spirituality in, you know, The Great Divorce, if you enjoy that, then you will definitely enjoy these, because he weaves it into these science fiction, outer space landscapes in such a beautiful way. I couldn't pick a favorite out of the three of them because they are all so different. Out of the Silent Planet is the first one, so you're really, you know, journeying through space with Ransom, the main character. And then in Perelandra, there's a fascinating kind of Adam and Eve retelling. And then That Hideous Strength brings us to this Earth, our planet, and there's a sort of denouement, basically a end of the world breaking point of the cosmic powers. If you've been thinking about checking these out, I would highly recommend getting down to it. I could see myself rereading these someday. There was just a lot of depth in it. There was also a lot of description. Like, you did get bogged down at times, but when Lewis comes through with his beautiful insights, it is so wonderful. This next pick is an author who has appeared on my favorite books of the year list before, but not under this name. Susan Scarlett is the name of the author, the pseudonym rather. That was the pen name that Noel Streatfeild wrote a series of romance novels under, and they are just such a delight. I think my favorite was probably Sally Ann. It was the first one that I read. Also, it has possibly the most fabulous cover. Isn't that such a cute coat? You do get some wonderful fashion in these. They're just really lovely Cinderella stories, but there are interesting asides and turns of phrase scattered throughout. Really heartwarming family scenes. Just a wonderful pick-me-up reading. I did reread Paradise Lost this year, but that's actually not the Milton that's on this list. I don't have a physical copy of Paradise Regained, and that is what has been one of my favorite reads of the year. Paradise Lost was one of my most frustrating reads of 2022, which you will have heard me chat about in my reading vlogs. If you want to hear more about any of these books, definitely go and check out my reading vlogs from the past year. But Paradise Regained is the story of Christ tempting by the devil, told with Milton's incredible skill. He just paints such an incredible picture. When you read Milton, it's like the literary equivalent of watching a movie, because you just have such an incredible vision that he spreads out before you. The voice of Christ was something that I found missing in Paradise Lost, which I guess is not surprising since this is the tale of the fall. Now, the devil really gets the last word in Paradise Lost, but in Paradise Regained, Christ gets the last word. The next book on the list was a very slim spiritual treatise called Searching for and Maintaining Inner Peace by Father Jacques Philippe. The title really says it all. It's about not only the search for inner peace, but that consistent trying to maintain it, because it really is a day-by-day struggle to remind yourself to rely on Christ and to remain at rest in his peace, because his peace is always there before you, even if it's difficult sometimes to stay within it. There were so many amazing quotations from saints, from the Bible, that I thought really enriched this book. In fact, the whole final portion of it, chapter by chapter, was just sayings from different saints in their own words about their own search for peace. Next on my list, I have two Victorian reads, both of which I read on my Kindle. It is so great the way you can get basically any Victorian, any old book for free on Project Gutenberg. The first one was The Heir of Redcliffe by Charlotte Mary Young. I had never heard of her before, but apparently she was more popular than Dickens in the Victorian period. She was just one of the most read authors. The lovely Kate Howe talked up this book, and I'm so glad that I sat down and read it. It really just takes you into family life in the Victorian era, but with all these interesting dilemmas and different situations, and really all of the characters are so sympathetically portrayed. You can kind of go into their mindset and see the world through their eyes, even when they're disagreeing very violently with each other. There's a very interesting twist on a sort of ancient feud within this family. An ancient curse of the Redcliffes comes into play, but not in the way you would expect. And then we also have an Anthony Trollope on the list. Rachel Ray, not the present day Rachel Ray, but a character of Trollope's. The Heir of Redcliffe was more of the upper classes. Rachel Ray is more of the lower classes. There's definitely a Sense and Sensibility sort of setup. You have a widowed mother and her two daughters who are in somewhat straitened circumstances, more lower to middle class. And here you get a beautiful portrait of village life and all the politics, and a new character comes to town and how he ends up fitting in and disrupting some people's plans and confusing other people. Trollope is so gossipy. I feel like I'm sitting watching Downton Abbey with him, and he's like whispering little asides about the characters, all in his own novel. Just talking about Rachel Ray is making me think that I need to read more Trollope. I'll have to make sure I have another Trollope on my 2023 reading list. This book I found at a used bookstore. It was only $3, and I thought, why not? I'd like to read some more Willa Cather. It's called A Lost Lady. I didn't expect much from it. On the back it says, Willa Cather composed something like an answer to Madame Bovary, a subtly shifting portrait of a lady who reflects the conventions of her age, even as she defies them. There are some Madame Bovary elements to it, but there are also just some really beautiful reflections on this time period. There's this sort of faded spirit of the pioneering West that comes into play. And the young man who's the narrator is really likable. I love how he gets to know the Forrester husband and wife, and tries to see them both fairly, and for their good points and their bad points. Definitely would recommend this one. 2022 was the first year of Regency, which was a Regency era readathon that I hosted with a couple other lovely book tours in the month of February. If you enjoyed that, definitely stay tuned for 2023. It was so much fun to dive into the time period of Jane Austen because I adore Jane Austen so much, and I had read some of her contemporaries here and there, but it was just wonderful to become more familiar. And there were a couple Feb Regency reads that have made it onto the top list of the year. I really enjoyed School for Scandal by Richard Sheridan. I picked this up at the library, kind of at the last minute, kind of on a whim, and I loved it so much. I don't know why people don't talk about Richard Sheridan more. He's basically the Oscar Wilde of the Regency period. There was so much biting wit and sarcasm, really funny misunderstandings, twists and turns. I think I will have to read another Richard Sheridan. Some of the most well-known writers of the Regency period were the Romantic poets such as William Wordsworth, and I read the works of his sister, Dorothy Wordsworth. This is Life at Grasmere. It is a collection of entries from her journals of the time, which I actually visited Dove Cottage in England, which is right near Grasmere in the Lake District, where she was living when she was writing this. And it's so wonderful to hear about her life with William, how she supported him and his art. This edition actually puts in some of William's poems, like when she mentions William wrote this poem today, they then put the poem in there, which was so fascinating. This is from the English Journeys series, which is kind of travel writings and country writings from British authors of the past, and I'm so glad they have one for Dorothy Wordsworth. She is a delight. She captures their days in the Lake District so beautifully. Next up, I have two blue books, which actually are both rereads, and I read them both with you guys, with the Bookish Kingdom. These were two of our book club picks. In my last week video, I talked about our 2023 schedule for the Bookish Kingdom book club. So maybe I'll also post that in the description if you're interested. It's been so much fun this year to talk with you guys face to face during our book club video chat. And one of the books we read was The Blue Castle by Ella Montgomery. This is a work of adult fiction by the author of Anne of Green Gables, and it takes place in the Mistawis in Canada. So you have this beautiful country setting, wild setting, and so many incredible descriptions of nature. You have Valancy Sterling, who gets some very surprising news at the outset and decides to make a change in her life, and really is learning to put her shoulders back, stand on her own 2 feet. That was actually a theme in both of these books. The other book is called The Blue Sapphire by D.E. Stevenson. She is one of my all-time favorite authors. This is so fun because it starts in London and then we go to Scotland. And both of those settings are such a delight. So delicious. In the beginning, Julia, our heroine, gets a job at a hat shop. She just has the best landlady who used to work in the theater and is just such a character. And then when she goes to Scotland, the characters up there are also just a delight. It's a bit of a different D.E. Stevenson. There's the stock market, the sapphires, a family mystery, but definitely one of my favorite D.E. Stevensons. The next book I wish I had purchased a physical copy of, but I didn't know I was gonna love it, so I just bought the Kindle version. It's called Unearthing the Secret Garden. It is about Frances Hodgson Burnett and her gardening life. It's by, oh my goodness, I didn't write the author's name, but I'll put the cover here on the screen. This author also wrote kind of gardening books about Beatrix Potter and Laura Ingalls Wilder. I haven't read the Laura Ingalls Wilder one yet, but I definitely want to check it out. It was so much fun to get to know Frances Hodgson Burnett's life. She really had an incredible life. She was born in England, lived there as a child, but then moved with her family to the US, had nothing, started writing, became known, ended up being able to go back to England and rented this beautiful estate where she became obsessed with the garden. And then she had gardens all over the world. And it's so incredible to hear about her love for plants. One of the things I loved best about this book was that really the whole last third were assorted writings from Frances Hodgson Burnett about her garden. She had a delightful little piece about the bird who plays a part in The Secret Garden, the book itself. I just loved that the author included that. Unearthing the Secret Garden was actually recommended to me by one of you guys, so thank you so much for that recommendation. It was so wonderful. Wonderful and delightful are just incredibly overused words in this video. I forgot to include this one with the Feb Regency reads, because this was another Feb Regency book, which actually I had started during the Boo to You readathon, my other readathon, the previous October, but I got stalled, felt like it just wasn't grabbing me. So I put it down and I picked it back up in February, and I'm so glad I did. Mysteries of Udolpho is, of course, parodied and mentioned in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and it was really, really cool to get to know to feel like I was more in on the joke, to know the context of the novel. I do think that after the, say, first third, it really picks up, and there's a lot of action. The first third kind of had me yawning, and I didn't understand why Henry Tilney read it on the edge of his seat, but then the last 2/3 of the book, I was on the edge of my seat. I was skimming through so fast I had to know what happened, what was behind the veil. I did a whole video reviewing it. Just quite a journey. I filmed a tour of my brother's rare and old books this year, and it has definitely had a bad influence on me, and I have been acquiring more old books of my own. These two I came across very serendipitously. God seemed to lead my hand to them. I did actually write a little blog post about them and about my favorite poems that I discovered in them. So you should go check that out if you haven't yet. bookishprincess.substack.com. I started that at the beginning of 2022, and I've had at least 2 posts a month over there, which has been really wonderful. But I had to write about the Weekend book. So this is an anthology of poems, of scientific facts, star charts, on food and drink, quick dishes to make, the law and how you break it. I mean, how can you not want to read a book with this section called The Law and How You Break It? The idea is that you would just pick this book up over the weekend and have a happy weekend, learn something new. I really have only touched the surface of these books, so I'm sure I will be referencing them and dipping into them more in the years to come, but they were a wonderful discovery in 2022. In 2021, I read a Shakespeare play a month. I was very proud of myself, and that was a wonderful project. Unfortunately, I think I only read 2 or 3 Shakespeare plays in 2022. I'll have to try to get back on that schedule next year. But one of them was Much Ado About Nothing. This is one of Shakespeare's comedies. It has Beatrice and Benedict, and I hadn't realized until I reread it just how much of a fun Pride and Prejudice mirror this book is. Just so many little interesting notes, so many little interesting similarities and complete differences. When I read it, I feel like I can also imagine Jane Austen reading it and like thinking of things to twist or turn or pick out and put into her novel. Shakespeare really is the master. He can turn a phrase like nobody else, and it's always a treat to immerse yourself in his writing. Because of the Jane Austen connection, and just because of how light and bright and wonderful the play itself is, I think this might be my favorite Shakespeare play. We're almost at the end of the list. I had to do some shuffling and rearranging to make room for some of these Advent reads that I've been telling you guys about recently. I've been doing a read-along of The Man Born to Be King by Dorothy L. Sayers with some other lovely booktubers. We're doing our live show wrap-up of it on New Year's Eve over on Christy Lewis Dostoevsky in Space on her channel, so definitely check that out. I've been listening to the audiobook version, but I did also purchase it. I wanted to be able to read Dorothy Sayers' excellent notes. They're actually notes that she gave to the producer before each play, and then she also has a really wonderful introduction where she talks about her method. If you've been watching The Chosen, which is an excellent modern adaptation of the Gospel, this is an adaptation of the Gospels for radio that was produced during World War II. But just as The Chosen brings Christ to life and really makes you think about the people that were there living with him, and just makes the stories from the Gospels so real, this does the same job, but in radio play format. Again and again, Dorothy Sayers just does not disappoint. This book is True Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. I feel like a lot of these books are in conversation with each other. The Man Born to Be King and True Devotion. St. Louis de Montfort writes about Mary, which of course is lovely to be reading during the Advent season. He talks about the benefits of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and how she is so dedicated to God that she leads us to God, and the importance of putting practices of devotion to Mary and to Christ into practice in your own life. There are just so many beautiful, beautiful reflections. I'm just so glad I picked this up. I'm really cutting it close with the light. There basically is no more light. That's okay, we only have a couple left. I've been rereading Pascal's Pensées. This is another that's kind of been in conversation with devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and The Man Born to Be King. Pascal basically invented the calculator. He was a brilliant mathematician in his time, but he was also a very faithful Christian, and he was working on this book about the Christian faith. sort of justification, apologetics. It never even had a title because he never got to a finished draft. We just have the notes, the pensée, the thoughts. So it is challenging in many ways to read this because you're reading this great writer's notes as he was constructing his masterpiece. So we don't get the actual finished work. The way he's seeking to understand God, though, and at the same time seeking to remind himself of his own limits, the limits of reason. We're mortal. We can't understand the mind of God, even though we're kind of called to try. We're called to be with God even while we're kind of stuck in our mortal sinful nature. Pascal just details that and picks that apart and looks at it. Speaking of classics in conversation, I read the Aeneid by Virgil this year, partly because last year I read Dorothy Sayers' translation of Dante's Divine Comedy, and of course Virgil guides Dante through Inferno and Purgatorio. So it was really wonderful to brush up on his writing in the Aeneid. And then Paradise Lost by Milton. He had a different view of the Aeneid, it seems like. I'm more on Dante's side. I think there's some wonderful inspiration to be found from Aeneas. And of course, it's just such a classic, epic tale. The widow Dido, the way Aeneas goes to visit his father in the underworld. Virgil was, of course, writing to kind of tie the Roman lineage of emperors back to the Trojan lineage. So we get a portrait of the Trojan War, and then we get Aeneas setting off on this epic journey to found Rome, essentially. It was just so interesting to read that with Dante fresh in my mind. Classics are just always so magical. And then last but not least, this is not a classic. And am I cheating a little bit to put this on the list? This was probably the most memorable and meaningful book of the year, though, for me personally, because it was my own book. The Book of Cymbeline I published this year. I illustrated it. It has 18 illustrations. It is, of course, the tale of my little kitten. She appeared at the end of 2021, so she's just over a year old, and I knew nothing about cats. And her arrival was such a storybook arrival. She showed up in the tree hollow that it seemed like she needed a storybook. It felt like she came out of a storybook, so I had to write the storybook. I've been wanting for quite a long time to buckle down and pursue more writing projects like my blog, but it was just so exciting to get this out. It's available in ebook format and paperback on Amazon. It's linked in the description below if you want to check it out and you haven't yet. Thank you so much to all of you who have been so kind and purchased it, left reviews. Your encouraging and kind words have just meant so much, and there are going to be future installments of the Book of Cymbeline. This one was A Kitten's Tale from Summer to Fall, so I am working on the next installment, and hopefully we'll have that out in 2023. I definitely should have done this at the beginning to do the thumbnail. Here's the stack of 2022 in the books. I hope you guys enjoyed this wrap up. I'd love to hear about your favorite reads of the year down in the comments. Thank you all so much for following along this year. If you're not yet, make sure you subscribe and join the Bookish Kingdom. I'll talk to you again soon in 2023, probably. Until then, stay bookish. Bye, guys.